Robotics, autonomous systems, and artificial intelligence, or RASAI, will be used in many environments in defence. This might include warfighting, humanitarian relief, logistics, and resupply. Building legal and ethical governance measures into existing and future RASAI capabilities will ensure RASAI are fit for purpose and controlled effectively. These governance measures must be guided by our national identity, our values, ethics and laws, and work with other allied nations' approaches. Governance is one of the 5 facets for ethical use of RASAI identified by Defence. This video is part of a series on these facets. The 5 facets are responsibility, governance, trust, law, and traceability. In this video, we will discuss governance from the perspective of defence personnel. Governance is concerned with the context technologies deployed in, because context determines how RASAI are used and controlled. Using examples from defence use of autonomous technologies and a fictional scenario called Striking Blind, this video will reflect on how governance mechanisms can act as a safeguard against poor decision-making by both human and machine.
Hi, my name's Wing Commander Michael Gann from Air Force Plan Jericho. I'm in the Australian War Memorial and I can't think of a better place to talk about the interaction of ethics and technology than where we are right now, which is under the V1 flying bomb from World War II. You could use an autonomous vehicle either for attack or defence, or even to carry ordnance or carry cargo or personnel. So that's within the autonomous systems. You could use artificial intelligence in command and control. So one of the applications we're looking at is how commanders make better decisions by taking recommendations of artificial intelligence systems that can gather enormous amounts of data and bring out really important things for the commander. You could also use artificial intelligence for force protection, such as for medical purposes. One of the real effective uses of artificial intelligence is to helping doctors identify and diagnose issues by taking a large amount of information from their patients, such as scans on identifying things like lung problems or cancers or tumours and similar things like that.
RASAI promise game-changing advantages for defence, but they also come with ethical and legal risk.
So when we choose to use these applications in the military context and in conflict or in the grey zone or close to conflict, we do run into a lot of ethical issues. And there's a lot of things that we have to consider that they even considered back in World War II with the new weapons as a technology was brought in each of those applications. For example, in the command and control situation, the artificial intelligence which is supporting the commander in his decision support mustn't be biased. It must know what information the commander wants and doesn't want, but most importantly, the artificial intelligence should have value alignment, so it should have the same values as the commander or the government or the force which it's working for. So that's a key thing of importance. There's a lot of critical areas where you have to consider the application of ethics with the use of robotic and autonomous systems in military and in conflict zones.
We must have methods for governing and controlling RASAI to ensure defence can develop, acquire and deploy these technologies in an effective, ethical and lawful manner. Governance can be provided in multiple forms, including law and policy, instructional guidelines, safety manuals and culture. The Australian Ethics Doctrine is one example of this.
I'm Dominic Tracy. I'm a Logistics Ordnance Corps Major with a petroleum background, and I was involved in the development of Striking Blind, which was a Perry Group paper looking at AI for the future and implementation in the battle space. In my mind, with the use and development of RAS and AI into the future, the Australian Ethics Doctrine provides a framework in which we can start testing and evaluating AI decisions, and more importantly, start seeing how we can shape data going into the AI to then come out with appropriate decisions for the ADF use into the future. And it just sets those parameters of what is acceptable and not acceptable for the AI recommendations into the future.
Governance mechanisms impose controls on RASAI throughout the life cycle of the technology. Australian Chief Defence Scientist Professor Tanya Munro has said that AI technologies offer many benefits, such as saving lives by removing humans from high-threat environments and improving Australian advantage by providing more in-depth and faster situational awareness. Governance frameworks from RASAI will help secure those advantages while ensuring better, ethical decision-making. It could also improve how we work with our allies.
In the field, commanders and individual soldiers and ADF members always have been and always will be responsible for their own decisions. But of course, this gets richer and more complex when we bring AI into the picture. We need to make sure that we really understand how those decisions, how those instructions made by individuals and commanders in the field lead to outcomes through AI. The key here is making sure that we have a good working understanding, fully implemented, of the international legal norms, and that we focus on interoperability with our allies. Because taking different approaches across elements that are meant to be interchangeable and interoperable in an allied warfighting environment could have disastrous consequences, which really pushes us into thinking about interoperability and interchangeability in the field in quite a different way than we have before. In the past, it's been much more about, do our warfighting platforms work well together? Can they communicate? Can they operate side by side to achieve a shared outcome? Now it's a much deeper question around data and what's done with that data and how that data is shared, and then how that data is used to guide in the moment decision making. I think it pushes us to a deeper embedded interaction with our allies, which I think will give us capability advantage. In 2019, Defence led a workshop that brought together some of the most expert individuals from around our nation in areas as diverse as specific areas of AI and machine learning, law, ethics, and defence, to really look at what we needed to form the foundations of a framework for ethical use of AI in defence. And the outcomes of that work and that report, I think, set the foundation, the context for us developing that capability. It's not about having a high-level abstract statement of intent. It's much more about building from the ground up an understanding of both the principles and the constraints that need to be put around AI and its use in the field. There's no question that the legal implications of the use of AI is going to create some very, very interesting case studies into the future. I'm going to start this part of the conversation by looking at Australia. Australia has really clearly articulated obligations as a signatory to international laws on military activities and weaponry. And our obligations under those are clear and well understood. But of course, we're developed in a pre-AI world. As we move forward and understand more fully the potential uses of AI through some of the work we do in applying it to some of our priority challenges, we won't escape the need to apply and use and comply with that legal framework. But what we will uncover is where we need to work with allies to refine, develop and clarify that framework as it applies to our actions. One thing that I think goes as a central tenet of our work with allies is that we work in a way that complies with international regulations, and we don't try and hide beneath the lack of clarity that laws that have yet to catch up with technology might have.
Human-machine collaboration should be optimised to safeguard against poor decision-making. The collaboration can be supported by governance frameworks that ensure creators understand the context in which RASAI is used and how the technology is controlled. In the 2021 Perry Group paper Striking Blind, Australian War College students used science fiction to consider the challenges of military AI and autonomous systems set in 2040. Their paper depicts the use of a fictional artificial intelligence system called Mandela, which is deployed too quickly and without transparency into an environment where it is not fit for purpose.
My name is Beck Marlowe. I just finished Staff College, and as part of that I did the Perry Group option, and we were looking at AI as part of our Perry Group module. We wrote a paper as part of the Perry Group module looking at some of the issues that could be faced by and challenges that could be faced for future AI procurement within defence. It was one of the questions that was posed by the CDF. So the scenario was an AI targeting system that had been introduced and was being used alongside loyal wingmen as part of the Air Force targeting system, but it was also being utilised by ground-based targeting officers to assist in identifying and verifying targets in the battle space. In our paper, it was an American-based system that we had been asked to introduce sooner rather than later due to a competing system being utilised by Chinese forces. So it became important that we had a near-peer level of ability to target. We were still introducing it into service when it actually became critical that we employ it. So not all of the testing and verification had been completed on the system by the time it started to be used as part of our papers.
AI systems should be deployed only after demonstrating effectiveness through experimentation, simulation, and live trials. Robust testing is necessary so that we can assess AI decision-making in relevant scenarios.
So that was what we were looking at, was what happens when you don't go through the complete process in order to introduce a system into service or start using a system before the full introduction into service piece has been completed. It used data, so it drew data from the environment, so from mobile phones or networks, other networks, in order to inform what the targeting picture was and whether or not the target was a viable target or not. And in this case, we were actually, one, being spoofed, but also there was network denial, which affected the ability of the targeting system to actually correctly identify and then prosecute a target.
Even though the fictional AI has not been fully reviewed, Mandela is deployed in a complicated, noisy environment to improve decision-making and support operators. However, the data used by the system is flawed and things start to go wrong.
So within Striking Blind, our main protagonist, Charles, engages ground targets based on a feed from the AI saying there is a legitimate target. And what leads up to that is a ground commander calling for fire support. The AI system identifies a group of targets that are legitimate targets and they're engaged. What it doesn't do is translate that into a secondary target very well. So the same pattern of behaviour is identified through a secondary group, which turns out to be a civilian group. And then the same pilot is given the same information feed, makes the same decision based on that information feed. However, it strikes an illegitimate target and causes unacceptable collateral damage. And then the rest of the story talks about the fallout and explores the issues because of the fallout of that decision.
We need to make sure that RASAI enable better, more ethical and lawful decisions and actions. To achieve this, operators need to be aware of a system's actions, decision, behaviours and intention. And training is needed to ensure that human-machine collaboration is optimised to prevent automation bias and over-reliance on the machine.
So in the Striking Blind scenario, Charles was conditioned to have confirmation bias, to trust that the AI's recommendations were going to be correct and that they were valid. Unfortunately, during the training that he received, he was never required to question the AI or to reinforce that what scenarios he needed to question the AI more than other scenarios, which then conditions people to trust or overly trust the AI's recommendations rather than to critically assess them. One of the problems when it comes to AI is AI increases the speed of decision making, or has the potential to do so, but the human still needs to critically evaluate that. If you just rely on the human critically evaluating every single decision, then you nullify the benefits of AI in that speed of decision making cycle.
The novelty of these emerging technologies means that we may need new ways of governing human decisions in complex and complicated environments. This will include legal control measures that could be integrated into the system during design phases. Damien Copeland is a Senior Research Fellow in the University of Queensland Law and Future of War Group. Damien's research focuses on the application of export control, arms trade and sanctions regimes relevant to the export and brokering of trusted autonomous military systems and associated technology.
So any technology is going to have limitations. So any operator who is responsible for the use of an AI system must understand its capabilities, but also the limitations, and therefore be able to use that knowledge to use the AI effectively. This will be gained from a thorough test, evaluation and validation process, which will endeavour to identify circumstances where the AI is not able to perform to the required standard, where the AI is susceptible to vulnerabilities, particularly from enemy actions or enemies' attempts to confuse the system. So before a commander's actually given an AI capability to use in armed conflict, then there needs to be a thorough understanding of what those limitations are. And then those that are responsible for its use, both at command and operator levels, should be thoroughly trained and practiced in the use of the AI in the environment where it's anticipated to be used. This can be expressed in the tactics, techniques and procedures that are developed for the use of the particular system. This can also be the product of recommendations from an Article 36 review, which could recommend that in certain circumstances the use of the AI should be limited or prohibited to ensure that it's capable of being used lawfully.
Article 36 reviews are part of Australia's legal obligations. Article 36 reviews evaluate technology throughout design and development, providing an opportunity to review and improve compliance and secure more humanitarian outcomes, such as responsibilities imposed by the Geneva Conventions. These laws set limitations on the ways war may be conducted. Major Chris Hall has worked on trials that use robotic vehicles for the resupply of combat teams and unmanned aerial systems for reconnaissance. He is working on ways to prepare future Army leaders to work alongside machines and human-machine teaming.
As RASAI systems develop further in complexity and lethality, it will raise issues that are specific to RASAI systems. There's the technical aspects, such as whether a system can distinguish between a farmer's vehicle or a technical vehicle with a weapon mounted on the back. More broadly, there are larger ethical considerations. The implications of RASAI systems for commanders to be able to ethically employ them are not necessarily obvious if you haven't worked in this space, and I've had to work pretty hard to understand some of them. What would be really useful is case studies of ethical and unethical employment of these systems to really demonstrate in a tangible way to commanders how it can go right or wrong. Any tool or weapon, including RASAI systems, can be used unlawfully or unethically, but ADF teams that have a strong military ethic will use them correctly like they currently employ their weapons. As the lethality and complexity of RASAI systems increases, more issues may come specifically from employment of RASAI.
RASAI can help enhance the way defence works. However, to be used effectively, new technology must be accompanied by comprehensive training packages to help commanders and operators know the frameworks that govern their use, as well as how to use the systems at hand.
I'm Corporal Jones. I'm a member of a support company working in 1RAR's innovation space. When RASAI can automatically process data, it may place a low significance on potentially important information that could change the outcome of a mission. Soldiers need a comprehensive training package to enable them to operate RASAI in complex and stressful situations. Operators need to be qualified and experts on the equipment. They need to know their SOPs, TTPs, their rules of engagement and the laws of armed conflict to effectively operate the machinery.
We need new and emerging technology to be aligned with those values and our legal obligations. RASAI will be ethical whether humans designing, developing and using the system are guided by these principles.
If Australia was involved in the initial phases of design or development of that AI, then some of our morals, values and ideals could be implemented, which is one of the things that Striking Blind is trying to do, is to prompt the conversation that Australia needs to be involved in AI development so that the product that is presented later on in 2040 for us in the near future is appropriate for us to use rather than relying on another country's or another organisation's morals and values opposed to the ADF's and Australia's morals and values. Within striking blind, fundamentally, the issue or the cause of the incident was a lack of understanding and training when it came to risk of using AI. It came down to not understanding risk of the implementation of AI at the start when it was rushed into service. It came in the training and testing and evaluation of the AI during its infancy and introduction into service, and the training of the pilot in the use of the AI to not understand the risks that are associated with the decisions that the AI has a bias for.
Returning to the fictional striking blind scenario, the RASAI system might have been used to better effect if improved governance frameworks were in place.
Sean Hamilton. I'm a pilot with experience on Super Hornets, Classic Hornets, and a little bit of time flying remote piloted aircraft. So what sort of governance structures would have helped manage the employment of Mandela? A couple of different issues to think about. The first one is not having a clear understanding on how exactly Mandela is making decisions. That is a technical and legal problem with how we going to buy artificial intelligence systems from the United States and have a clear understanding of how exactly they're developed, how they're taught, how they're learning on the fly, and how can we analyse their decisions and pick up any sort of errors that happen in the course of operations. So that's going to require very close work with industry. We need to be inside the tent when they're developing these systems, and we need to have really clear arrangements for the flow of information. We need to make sure that when we purchase the artificial intelligence system, it's not just buying it at the shop and taking it home. It's a full life cycle approach where the industry that made the system is fully embedded in the operation of the system, and they're helping the ADF continue to monitor its functionality, conduct continuous tests, and making sure that it's still behaving in the way that we expect it to behave, so that we've got full disclosure on how exactly it's making decisions. The other part of the problem is the accountability framework. So in our story, there's no accountability framework beyond what we currently have at the moment, where the buck stops with the commander, and the ground force commander that's getting these recommendations is fully responsible for making sure that we adhere to ROE and the laws of armed conflict. That was inappropriate in this particular instance because he was put in a position where he was conditioned to trust the AI, and essentially what wouldn't have been reasonable for him to overrule that decision. So we need to put more thought into the accountability structure. So who's accountable in this chain? And one could argue that we would need a body or a person, a commander, up much higher to authorise the system into service, and then make sure that it's specifically authorised for that theatre, and give very clear guidance to the commanders on when they're expected to just take recommendations, and they'll be backed up legally in taking those recommendations, and when they're expected to question those. So what sort of left and right bounds of assumptions should the commander be operating in?
Different elements in our existing structures may have to be adapted in order to support governance of RASAI. For instance, intellectual property and international traffic in arms regulations frameworks.
Intellectual property, that is the software system and the programming inside the black box, belongs to the company that created it. So having access to that, if it needs to be modified by us to suit different operating scenarios, because we discover through our verification and validation and verification process that we are using it in a slightly different way or with slightly different parameters to how the US was employing it, that we need that ability to be able to change it. ITARS is the International Trade and Armament Regulations, and that is imposed on sale and use of arms and technologies by foreign forces. So there are restrictions on what we can know within a system, whether that is purchasing the IP from the company or creating a legal framework with the United States that better enables us to work within the ITAR framework to then get access to what's inside the system to better understand it. Because if they were the ones who asked us to use it because of the near-peer advantage with the Chinese, then there needs to be some framework allowed to enable us to actually get inside and have a look and then adapt it to what is available for the Australian system to use.
Governance methods provide protection from poor decision-making by humans and machines. Control measures will be critical to ensure that RASAI capabilities can perform their functions both lawfully and ethically. Commanders and operators will require training in both capabilities and limitations of the technology, as well as the measures we create to control them.